Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate was an American cult founded during the 1970s, where the founders of it claimed that they both witnessed the coming of the world's end in a vision. This California-based cult became popular because of its belief that extraterrestrial life, or aliens, were higher life forms responsible for eternal salvation. According to the founders, the Earth was set to experience a doomsday event, and aliens were going to save the lives of the cult members by taking them on board their spacecraft, where they could achieve immortality. The cult existed for more than 20 years, until 1997, when the arrival of the Hale-Bopp comet made the members believe that the planet was nearing its end. What looked like a rave party full of drugs and alcohol turned into a gravesite when 39 members of the cult volunteered to commit mass suicide. The fanatics believed that it was time for them to shed their physical forms so that they could be transported to the alien spaceship following the comet. Shinrikyo. Shinrikyo, or better known as the Doomsday Cult, blended different beliefs of Buddhism, Hinduism, and apocalyptic visions to attract fanatics into its combined belief system. The founder of the cult was a man called Asahara, a talented storyteller with incredible charisma, believed that he could absorb the world's sins, and that only those who followed him would be given the spiritual power to be free of their sins. He also believed that a nuclear war was going to destroy the planet, killing everyone except his followers. In 1995, the cult became an international terrorist organization when it launched an attack on the Tokyo subway. Members of the cult released a deadly gas called sarin, which killed 13 people and caused injuries to countless survivors. There were different reasons for the terrorist attack. The first was that Asahara needed to bring about the end of the world, eventually leading to his group's victory. But the second was rooted in his belief in karma, and that by killing people who didn't believe in his group's cause, they would prevent the accumulation of bad karma. Unfortunately for Shinrikyo, bad karma got to them when Asahara and the other key members were arrested. While the attacks didn't stop after that, Asahara and 6 other cult members were eventually executed in 2018. The People's Temple. Jim Jones founded the People's Temple back in 1954. The religion combined Christianity with communism, while emphasizing racial equality. Jones's openness in accepting different people into his group was one of the reasons why the People's Temple gained a massive following. Things took a dark turn when the media started investigating the religion's questionable practices, including claims that the Bible had been limiting every Christian in the world. Members of the cult started harassing the media for exposing their practices. The government scrutinized the cult when Jones started hunting down defectors and supporting rebellious military groups. Jones took over 900 devoted followers and relocated his religion to a Guyana-based settlement popularly called Jonestown to avoid unwanted attention and scrutiny. However, in 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan started investigating Jonestown when reports and allegations of abuse on its members surfaced. The congressman's investigations forced Jones to order the assassination of Ryan's group and the defectors who left with him. The night after the assassination, Jones forced his members to drink a concoction laced with cyanide, resulting in the deaths of over 900 people. Anyone who tried to resist was injected with lethal doses of cyanide. Jones was found dead as well from self-inflicted gunshot wounds. The Order of the Solar Temple. Luc Jouret and Joseph de Membro founded the Order of the Solar Temple in 1984 in Switzerland. This religion sought to combine different themes from New Age movements, Christianity, and UFO conspiracy theories to create a new and unique belief system that attracted followers who were fascinated by extraterrestrial religions. Jouret and de Membro preached that they were meant to get to a mythical planet in the Sirius star system. For them, death was only a way to ultimately reach this planet, where they could transcend human existence. Attempting to shed their earthly forms, Jouret and de Membro convinced their followers to engage in mass suicide rituals in the middle of the 90s. However, the mass suicide rituals had other reasons, including the execution of traitors and possible defectors, and the members who agreed with the beliefs of the group, but not by physical death. In 1994, 2 fires broke out in Switzerland, resulting in the discovery of the bodies of the founders, along with members of the cult. 2 more massacres were carried out by the surviving members of the cults, eventually pushing the death toll to 77. The mass suicides eventually stopped when the authorities cracked down on the cult's activities and arrested the remaining leaders. The Manson family. Charles Manson, a struggling musician, founded a gang called the Manson family, which had cultist beliefs that were centered on the hippie culture prominent during that era. The members of the family lived unconventional lifestyles and used psychoactive drugs such as LSD, and were primarily young women who were attracted to Manson's charismatic teachings. Manson believed in an apocalyptic war he called Helter Skelter, which was a doomsday scenario involving brutal battles between black and white people. The Helter Skelter belief was said to have been the reason why Manson directed his followers to carry out a series of murders in 1969. Their most prominent victim was an actress named Sharon Tate. Manson wanted to fulfill his prophecy of a race war, and he thought that Tate's death would incite tensions between the black and the white communities. Manson never participated in the murders, but he was eventually convicted of murder and conspiracy for inciting the series of killings. He was in and out of prison until 2017, when, at the age of 83, he died from cardiac arrest while still serving time. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. This cult was founded in 1989 by Credonia Muirinde and Joseph Kibuitere. It preached the importance of the 10 Commandments, attracting traditional believers into the religion. Members avoided speaking, eating, or having sex out of fear of breaking one of the commandments. The religion also believed the end was coming on December 31, 1999. The leaders demanded money and material possessions from their followers to convince them it was their only way to gain salvation. When the apocalypse never came, members rebelled and demanded the return of their money. Out of desperation, the leaders took matters into their own hands. March 17, 2000 was the next prophesied date of the apocalypse, and the movement held a massive party at their compound. However, the building erupted in flames, burning everyone within. Meanwhile, both of the founders mysteriously disappeared on the night of the massacre. Ugandan authorities launched an investigation and recovered over 900 bodies that were either burned or poisoned in different properties owned by the movement. The conclusion was that this wasn't a mass suicide, but was a mass murder that was launched to stage the leaders' failed apocalyptic prophecies. The Children of God. The Children of God was founded by David Berg in 1968 and started as a Christian evangelical movement. However, Berg started interpreting the Bible in his way. The Children of God embraced unconventional practices that society frowns upon, such as communal living, free love, and plenty of sex. Meanwhile, members of the group used sex as a means to recruit new members, giving rise to the term flirty fishing. At its peak, the group had tens of thousands of members, most of whom were young people attracted to the sexual openness of the group. However, the cult's practices eventually reached a mainstream audience, leading to criticisms and even allegations of abuse and exploitation on the part of the group's members. In the hopes of shedding its negative image, the cult underwent a series of internal reforms, turning their backs on their criticized practices, eventually becoming known as the Family International, or TFI. After the group changed its name, it began instituting rules to protect its younger members from exploitation. Flirty fishing was also discontinued. The recent teachings of this group describe its members as soldiers in the spiritual war of good versus evil. But there is still an openness to sexuality in this group, which claims that they have an intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. This cult still exists today, but no longer has the same following it once had during its peak. The Anthill Kids. Roche Thériault established the Anthill Kids in 1977, based in Canada. Roche, who used his claims as a divine authority figure, convinced people to quit their jobs and live with him in a community that allowed them to listen to his speeches and live free of sin. However, the cult turned into a hellhole instead of a united and peaceful community. Roche forced members to undergo brutal rituals, including amputations and genital mutilation, which he believed were the best ways to purify a person's body and soul. He also became more of an authoritarian figure who controlled every aspect of the members' lives, forcing them to obey him without question. During the 1980s, the authorities heard of the cult's activities when allegations of physical and psychological abuse and even murder surfaced. These allegations led to Roche's arrest and imprisonment in 1989. In 2011, Roche's cellmate, Matthew Gerard, became the harsh hand of justice when he stabbed and killed the former cult leader in prison, even admitting to his crimes to the prison guards right after committing the act. Matthew had nothing to lose, as he was already serving a life sentence for his previous crime. NXIVM. In 1998, Keith Raniere started a group called NXIVM, which was supposed to be a self-help organization that empowered its members. The group grew to 18,000 followers in North America alone until 2017, when members of the organization opened up about the abusive practices within the organization. It turned out that a secret society existed within this organization, and women joined the group believing they would be part of a sisterhood. Raniere abused those women, forcing them to do his bidding. His power and influence over the members also contributed to the psychological abuse suffered by its younger members. He convinced them that his semen had supernatural abilities to heal women. The only way for the women to minimize the abuse within the group was to recruit more women, who were now at the bottom of the pyramid and were abused more than the older members of the cults. But the worst part was that newer recruits had to give naked photos to their masters to be used for blackmailing them in case they exposed the group's practices. After the group's practices were exposed, more than a dozen women testified in court against Raniere's harsh and abusive practices. The mastermind was eventually convicted of several crimes, but Raniere's lawyers said that he was never sorry for his actions. Charismatic leadership. Jim Jones's charismatic approach as a leader was one of the reasons why he pulled a lot of followers to the People's Temple, eventually leading to one of the biggest mass suicides in history, killing over 900 people. Charismatic leadership in cults is like a magnet that pulls metal shavings. This process taps into cognitive dissonance and social identity theory, making it difficult for followers to question the leaders or leave the cult due to their strong desire for group consistency and identity. Instead, cult leaders use charm and persuasive words to compel and captivate followers into believing their vision. This leads to a devoted group of people dying for their cause. Their words are so profound that they can exert influence over the lives of their supporters. Cult leaders usually have magnetic personalities that make them confident and charming. They know how to captivate followers using tales that can mesmerize their audiences and keep them glued through the promise of eternal salvation and a sense of belonging. However, behind that curtain of charisma is a manipulative leader who acts like a spider luring insects with a web of lies that will eventually trap them. Before they realize they're doomed, it's already too late for the followers because their leader's silver tongue already traps them. Groupthink and conformity. Groupthink and conformity functions can be seen in how fashion becomes a thing. When you see everyone wearing the same style of hat, even if you don't like the hat, you'll be pressured to buy the hat because you want to conform to society and fit in instead of standing out. This pressure to conform is similar to what happens in cults. Even if a particular cult's views contradict your values, you'll be pressured to adopt the same beliefs and behaviors. You want to conform to the same beliefs that people around you follow because you want to conform to the group's standards. This is often present in smaller, isolated communities. Even if you're not necessarily a devout believer, you want to feel accepted and avoid conflict. That's how groupthink occurs. People prioritize consensus and harmony instead of contradicting the views of certain members of the same group. So in a cult, contradictions and doubts are suppressed in favor of groupthink to promote unity. Psychological manipulation techniques. Cult leaders use invisible strings that come in the form of psychological manipulation techniques. It's like they're master puppeteers who make their followers dance at will and make them do things they wouldn't normally do had it not been for the cult leaders' manipulative tactics. Charles Manson used his psychological manipulation techniques to gather followers into his family. He manipulated their vulnerabilities by promising them salvation if they would trigger his apocalyptic visions, which would elevate him to messianic status. Other than that, cult leaders are also known for using sneaky tactics, including love bombing, where they make their followers feel loved by giving them attention. A love-bombed recruit will feel unique enough to join the cult, just like how a naive teenager can fall for flowers and chocolates. Some cult leaders use control over basic needs to manipulate their members psychologically. Others also use fear to their advantage. It can come in the form of punishments from the leaders. Sometimes they convince their followers of an impending doom, causing them to fall in line out of fear. Psychological manipulation is the forte of an expert cult leader who knows the specific techniques that can force his followers to obey unquestionably. The role of isolation. A cult leader's isolation tactics work like an island that strands cult members in a secluded and isolated area with nowhere else to go. They trap supporters in a proverbial fortress to shield them from any influences from the outside world, making it harder for them to see the opinions of those who aren't part of their organization. When a member is physically, mentally, and emotionally isolated within a cult, opposing opinions and differing views regarding some issues will be challenging to come by. Their only opinions come from their leaders and fellow members, forcing them to have only one worldview. So if the only information that the members know about a specific topic is the one that their leaders feed them, they are more likely to stay loyal to the group, believing that the cult's ideology is the only truth. Moreover, isolation tactics also give the members a sense of exclusivity that makes them feel special. It's like the cult gives them the impression that they are in an ivory tower, but are, in reality, trapped in a jail cell of manipulation. Jim Jones famously employed such tactics on his followers, especially after he moved them to his Jonestown compound, physically and mentally isolating them from the rest of society. The appeal to disenfranchised individuals. David Berg's Children of God grew because he targeted youth members of countercultural movements during the 60s and 70s. He appealed to their disenfranchisement from society to create a cult with loyal followers. A cult leader who tries to appeal to disenfranchised individuals attacks their feelings of loneliness and helplessness. They look for people who have lost faith in society or have become disenfranchised from the everyday workings of the world. It's like how rebel groups look for recruits with the same hatred for the government. From there, the cult leader gives the recruits a place to feel like they belong. They make them feel understood and at home, making them feel that the cult is the only place where they can be themselves. Someone who has a sense of belonging is more likely to stay loyal to the person who gave it to them. In this case, it's the cult leader. In short, cults prey on vulnerable people who are still searching for meaning in their lives. Cults lure them with the promise of love, family, and acceptance, only for them to end up getting manipulated into doing all sorts of crazy things for the sake of belonging. Identity reconstruction. Identity reconstruction was another tactic that Charles Manson used to create a cult of loyal followers willing to kill for him. He reshaped their sense of self and instilled allegiance to his twisted beliefs. When a cult leader uses identity reconstruction, they reshape and twist the beliefs and sense of identity of their recruits according to the cult's beliefs and norms. It's like you're playing with Lego bricks to create a house, but someone comes in and uses the same bricks to rearrange them to create an entirely different structure. The new structure is still made out of the same Lego bricks, but is no longer recognizable from the old one. In the same way, cult leaders simply use a person's values to reconstruct a new person that adheres to their beliefs. For example, if a person feels lost in society because he has no place in the modern world, the cult leader uses that vulnerability to reconstruct a new identity that hates society. Cult members who have identities tied to the cult itself are more likely to commit extreme acts to protect their sense of identity and beliefs. The process can be subtle yet coercive, allowing leaders to use different ways to break their members' personalities and sense of individuality to force them to adhere to their beliefs. Before a member knows it, they have lost touch with their former selves and have become receptive to the group's ideology. The BITE model. The BITE model is used to understand cults and is divided into 4 categories: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. It is a cult leader's recipe book for a dish to gain obedient and loyal followers. Behavior control is the instructions given by a recipe. Cults dictate what you can and cannot do, and when you can and cannot do specific actions. They regulate your actions and limit the things that you can do. Information control acts as the ingredients you use in a recipe. Cults feed you information according to their beliefs, similar to how a recipe excludes all other ingredients from a dish. Thought control, meanwhile, acts as the recipe's flavors, in the sense that cults shape how people think through rituals and messages. They steadily change people's thinking by adding subtle yet strong spices to change the flavor of the recipe. Finally, emotional control is similar to how a recipe is presented to a diner. Cults use your emotions to make you feel guilty about leaving the group, just like a master chef uses a beautiful presentation to make you feel guilty if you don't like the flavors. Trauma bonding. The old saying goes, misery finds company. Trauma is a powerful tool that can help bond people like superglue. Whenever people have gone through the same miserable and rough experiences in life, they tend to find company in people who have also gone through the same experiences. Cults use trauma bonding to attract and keep members of their organizations. It's like saying, hey, we know what we've been through, so we can help you. These cults also create environments where members depend on one another for their safety and sense of belonging. As the members stay in the cult longer, the leaders psychologically, emotionally, and physically abuse their members. But trauma bonding allows the members to stay inside the cults in the hopes that they can do better to gain their leader's approval and hopefully stop the abuse, as they've already grown too attached to their abuser. Keith Raniere, the founder of NXIVM, abused the female members of his cult, but because of trauma bonding, the members stayed for years and even recruited new members to please Raniere and pass the cycle of abuse on to the new members. It became a pyramid scheme where the ones who recruit new members get better benefits, prompting them to stay instead of leaving the cult. The process of indoctrination. When you plant and cultivate seeds in a garden, they grow into plants. It's the same thing with the process of indoctrination, which relies on the cult leader planting the seeds of ideology into the minds of their recruits. They do so by using persuasive speeches, visions of grandeur, and subtle manipulative tactics that eventually grow into plants of ideologies. Once the seeds have grown, followers start to adopt the cult's ideas as their own, without even realizing how much their beliefs have changed. But the indoctrination doesn't stop there because, as gardeners, cult leaders need to weed out unwanted plants. Followers must abandon their ideologies and adhere only to the group's beliefs. Their personal opinions are regarded as weeds that must be rooted out to ensure that the cult has an ideal garden of faithful followers. A member without any opposing beliefs is easier to manipulate for abusive cult leaders. One good example of this is Joseph DeMambro, the leader of the Solar Temple cult. He utilized the process of indoctrination by enforcing his authority onto his members and subjecting them to psychological manipulations until they were loyal enough to commit suicide and murders. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. Everyone has a weakness or a vulnerability that people can exploit. A vulnerable person is like a house with a weaker lock or a room with a busted door hinge. A careful and experienced burglar should be able to find such vulnerabilities, enter the house, and do whatever he wants. That's what happens when a cult leader exploits a person's weaknesses. Weaknesses can be anything, from feelings of loneliness and heartbreak or insecurities. But most people lock their vulnerabilities inside closed doors. Cult leaders, however, are skilled enough to break these locks open and use them to their advantage to gain the trust of their followers. When a cult leader is inside, they can rearrange the person's beliefs and ideas, just like a burglar can rearrange the furniture in a house he broke into. Before the person realizes it, the cult has already taken advantage of their vulnerabilities to force their ideals onto them. Warren Jeffs, leader of the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, claimed divine authority and manipulated the religious beliefs of his followers, ultimately using their vulnerabilities against them to control and coerce them. Us versus them mentality. Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church, taught his followers that they were the chosen ones, destined to unite the world, essentially making them think that it was them against everyone else. The us versus them mentality is like a dividing wall that keeps two opposing ideologies on each side. Those on one end are the us. Meanwhile, everyone who isn't on that side is the them, or the others. What cult leaders do is that they try to distinguish their cults as groups that are in opposition to those who aren't members of their order, while making them feel unique and superior compared to outsiders. Because of this mindset, members of a cult believe that they know better than anyone who isn't part of their group, and are in a better position in terms of their beliefs and ideologies. The same mindset also allows them to stick together, believing that the only ones who can understand them are their fellow cult members. This mentality can be strong enough for members to actually cut ties with family and friends who don't belong to their cults. They see themselves as the ones who are correct and are willing to alienate or oppose anyone who doesn't share the same beliefs. The worst part is that they're only willing to accept information or opinions from the inside instead of the outside. Identity fusion. A bucket of water has a unique identity from the ocean. But once you pour the entire bucket into the ocean, it ceases to be unique because it loses its distinctiveness when it merges with a bigger body of water. Cults work in the same way by gradually fusing the identities of their members with the bigger identity of the entire group, forcing them to lose their individualities. Shoko Asahara of Aum Shinrikyo used the same tactic by making his followers believe they were all part of the same elite group, destined to survive a global apocalyptic event. Members of that group lost their individuality and were willing enough to commit acts of terror to bring about Shoko's vision. People in cults experience this when they adopt the group's values and goals as their own, becoming fanatics who take on the cult's identity. Cult leaders are to blame for this because they manipulate their members by coercing or feeding them information gradually and subtly that convinces their followers that there is only one universal truth. When members fuse their identities with the entire cult, they can no longer differentiate between right and wrong because their group's ideals dictate their discernment. This can force members to commit illegal acts, all for the sake of the cult. Deception. Deception is arguably the most common denominator in all cults, because cult leaders need to conceal the truth from their followers to force them into blind submission. For example, Keith Raniere deceived women into thinking that NXIVM was a support group, but was instead an avenue for him to commit abuse. It's similar to how a magician hides the truth from the audience using curtains. Audiences are amazed at the seemingly supernatural feats of a magician, but are blind to the fact that they are being tricked from behind the curtain. In the same way, cults lure followers with grand promises, such as eternal salvation and enlightenment, but hide the fact that they have ulterior motives that could take the form of abuses or personal enrichment at the expense of the followers. The problem is that cult leaders are so skilled at hiding the truth that their followers fall for their tricks for years or even decades. This can create an illusion that could make it harder for cult followers to distinguish reality from a false image created by their leaders. The deception tactics can be subtle, but can also have powerful and lasting effects that can trick followers into blind submission. Women's suffrage movement. Until 1920, women in the United States were not allowed to vote, a privilege reserved for men. The argument was that women were only homemakers and lacked the experience and knowledge about political issues. But women were just as capable and deserving as men to get involved in politics. This gave rise to the women's suffrage movement, which demanded change in the country's political climate, as women also wanted to exercise the same civil rights as men. Famous leaders such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton led this movement and gave women nationwide a voice by organizing marches, peaceful protests, and hunger strikes. One good example of their peaceful events and protests was when they organized tea parties to educate women and recruit supporters. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was finally passed, giving women the right to vote and choose the country's leaders. The women's suffrage movement was a stepping stone for women worldwide, as other countries followed this example and introduced changes that allowed women to exercise their civil right of suffrage. Environmental movement. The middle of the 20th century gave birth to the environmental movement, which focuses on environmental concerns regarding Earth. It rose due to the pollution, habitat destruction, and resource depletion brought about by rising populations, wars, and increasing industrialization. It gained momentum through scientific studies about the impact of human activity on the environment and how carbon emissions have been polluting the atmosphere, causing rapid changes in climates and temperatures around the world. Protests and grassroots activism have helped raise these concerns to governments, as studies showed that melting glaciers in the Arctic caused rising sea levels. Flowers were growing in the Arctic, which was supposedly too cold for vegetation. Different global conventions, such as the Vienna Convention, the Montreal Protocol, and the Kyoto Protocol, have been organized to allow different countries to discuss the planet's environment and how they can work together to minimize their environmental impact. Despite that, the environmental movement still faces challenges, including large corporations and highly industrialized countries that resist change. However, the movement has helped alter perspectives and lifestyles, allowing people to adopt measures that are friendlier to the environment and have minimal carbon footprints, which measure how much carbon dioxide a person produces. Black Lives Matter movement. The civil rights movement during the 20th century may have helped give equal rights to black people, but people of color still suffer from societal discrimination and unfair treatment. The 2013 acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting of Trayvon Martin and the George Floyd incident in 2020 gave traction to the Black Lives Matter movement, which echoes the struggles of people of color regarding police brutality and systemic unfairness towards them. Reports and incidents of black people getting mistreated by law enforcers have been around for decades, leading people of color to raise their concerns about how their lives aren't given the same value as the lives of white people in America. The BLM movement was at its peak during the 2020s, when law enforcers were suspected of mistreating black suspects. Protests included prominent figures, such as professional athletes, actors, and musicians. In Washington, protesters even projected the names of victims of police brutality onto historic landmarks. While the Black Lives Matter movement has pushed conversations regarding race and justice, it still faces concerns regarding the relationship between poverty and violence and crime within the black community. Still, the movement seeks to fight for better opportunities for black people to improve their livelihoods and minimize race-induced incidents. Me Too movement. The Me Too movement started in 2006 when activist Tarana Burke started it to address sexual harassment and assault issues throughout the country. But it was only in 2017 when it gained worldwide attention, mainly due to the rise of the Me Too hashtag on social media. Through the Me Too movement, more women were empowered to speak up about their own experiences of sexual harassment and assault. Before the movement's rise, women were afraid to open up out of fear of its social and legal consequences. But the movement doesn't only empower women to speak up, instead it aims to provide support systems to survivors of sexual harassment and assault while also holding people accountable for their actions. The rise of the movement has helped the evolution of sexual harassment and assault laws and rules in different cities and workspaces all over the world, making different environments safer for women. Anti-apartheid movement. This movement emerged in response to the South African government's racial segregation and discrimination from 1948 to 1994. Apartheid itself was the system that separated people based on their race, as black South Africans faced heavy oppression throughout the country. The anti-apartheid movement aimed to end the unjust and oppressive system and allow everyone in the country to enjoy equal rights and treatment. During the middle of the 20th century, Nelson Mandela and other leaders led the charge and held protests and boycotts to force the South African government's hand. Mandela, in turn, was imprisoned for 27 years for his role as the leader of the opposition to apartheid policies. The international community supported Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement, leading to boycotts that affected the South African economy and international image. During the early 90s, the apartheid laws were finally abolished, and Mandela rose to become the country's first black president in 1994. In an exciting turn of events, Mandela told his fellow black South Africans to forgive their oppressors, allowing them to become more prominent. Anti-war movement. The premise of the anti-war movement is about saying no to war, especially after the first two world wars caused unprecedented loss of life and economic problems all over the world. Over 115 million died during the events of World War II. It's no wonder that the anti-war movement gained prominence during the 1960s, when it became synonymous with the hippie culture of preaching peace and love during the Vietnam War. During the 2000s, the anti-war movement saw a revival when the US went to war with Iraq in what most people believe was not a fight for freedom, but a fight for resources because of Iraq's rich oil deposits. Supporters of the movement believe that war is never the answer to conflicts between nations, and that it would only lead to the deaths of innocent lives and the destruction of homes and communities. Protesters hold rallies to oppose war and advocate for peace and love. The movement promotes intelligent discourse among international leaders and governmental transparency about the reasons for going to war. Disability rights movement. The disability rights movement started during the 20th century when people with disabilities were often excluded from society, especially in education, employment, and access to public services. This movement aims to fight for fairness and equality for those suffering from disabilities and to accommodate their needs. One of the most significant events in the history of this movement happened in 1977, when activists staged a 28-day sit-in at the San Francisco offices of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, known as the Section 504 sit-in. The sit-in pressured the government to sign regulations protecting the rights of people with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990 to protect the rights of people with disabilities. As such, people with disabilities were given opportunities for education and employment and better access to public spaces, including ramps and reserved parking areas. Occupy movement. Popularized by the "We Are the 99% slogan, the Occupy movement protested economic disparities between between the ultra-rich and regular workers struggling to make ends meet. The movement was characterized by the fact that only 1% of the population enjoyed comfortable lives, while the rest of the 99% struggled and suffered for the mistakes of the wealthy. The movement resulted from the 2008 recession caused by financial institutions when they faced substantial losses after housing mortgages defaulted. Supporters of the Occupy movement were outraged by the housing market crash, primarily caused by wealthier people belonging to the so-called 1%. At the height of the movement, protesters occupied New York City's Wall Street, one of the capitals of the country's financial industry. They camped out in protest against the existing financial system. They criticized companies and financial institutions for the unfair distribution of wealth, eventually opening the opportunity for people to call for more economic accountability. But the Occupy movement didn't just seek to disrupt the financial market during the protests. Protesters gathered around 5,000 books and formed a library to improve grassroots education and income opportunities. The Occupy movement didn't change the financial system, but it raised awareness of the income disparity in society. Feminist movement. The feminist movement started in the 19th century when women fought for the right to suffrage. Since women won their right to vote, the feminist movement has grown and allowed women worldwide to enjoy better rights. Feminism, however, was never meant for women to enjoy special privileges while pulling men down. Instead, it advocates for women to have the same jobs, educational, and political opportunities as men. As such, laws have been enacted to trim the societal disparities between men and women. Supporters of this movement also seek to reject traditional gender roles. During the 1968 Miss America protest, feminists threw various items, including bras, cosmetics, and girdles, into a freedom trash can to symbolize their hatred for traditional beauty standards. The feminist movement has since evolved into something bigger. Today, feminists also fight against gender discrimination, regardless of the person's gender, while also opening discussions about reproductive rights and violence against women. Labor movement. The movement aims to help workers stick together to fight for better treatment in the workplace, while advocating for fairer wages. It began in the 19th century when rapid industrialization demanded more laborers. However, workers in factories and mines faced harsh working conditions that affected their health. The laborers organized strikes and protests to demand improved working conditions and higher pay. The grassroots beginnings of the labor movement are one reason labor unions exist in many different industries worldwide. Laws have also been enacted to protect workers' rights and improve workplace standards, which gave rise to an economically more robust middle class. Supporters of the labor movement also helped different labor unions. During the 20th century, a group of labor union members often traveled to different parts of the U.S. to support striking workers, showcasing the solidarity of laborers in the country. Over time, the movement grew stronger, leading to essential changes like establishing labor unions and laws to protect workers' rights. These efforts improved working conditions and helped create the middle class. Human rights movement. The horrors of World War II and the unprecedented loss of life brought about by the Holocaust, which both caused the deaths of over 75 million, including 6 million Jews, gave rise to the human rights movement, which promotes fairness and respect for every human. This movement initially promoted the value of human lives, but it became a catch-all social movement that fought against all manners of unjust treatment, including discrimination, slavery, violence, and injustice. It ensures everyone is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of race, gender, religion, or nationality. The rights of the human rights movement gave rise to international human rights treaties, most notably the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It also contributed to the rise of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the different human rights commissions found in most countries. Arab Spring Movement. The Arab Spring Movement was a social movement that started in Tunisia when a street vendor set himself on fire in protest against corrupt and unfair governments. The movement grew in 2010 through the concerted effort of people who facilitated and coordinated through social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. Traditional forms of activism also played critical roles in the protests. Since then, people all over the Arab world have worked together to organize protests against harsh and oppressive governments. People set up demonstrations across the region to demand more freedom and respect for their fundamental human rights. The movement eventually spread to other Arab countries. In Egypt, longtime leaders Zine el-Abidine Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak were ousted from power due to protests. In Syria, a civil war broke out, causing devastating conflicts. Then, in Libya, a civil war resulted in the overthrow and death of Muammar Gaddafi. The outcomes of the Arab Spring movement were mixed, as some countries experienced favorable results movements that help change their culture, while other countries cause turmoil within the populace and the government. So while social movements can help push society forward, they can also pull them backward, depending on the methods used for protest. Roswell UFO incident. During the 1930s and 40s, the US was in the middle of a flying saucer phase, when many civilians started reporting sightings of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, flying all over US airspace. But the most popular out of all of these UFO sightings is the Roswell incident. The event occurred in Roswell, New Mexico, when a farmer reported that a balloon made of unknown and mysterious materials crashed on his property. He claimed that government officials in armored vehicles quickly came to the premises to recover the unidentified object and any debris it left behind. The United States Army even announced that they had a flying disc. This event made headlines worldwide and forced the Army to retract its statement by saying it was merely a weather balloon. But in 1978, a retired Air Force officer claimed that the weather balloon story was made to cover up the true story and that the debris recovered was actually of alien origin. The story quickly became the root of countless alien conspiracy theories and how the government has been concealing the existence of aliens. It is even speculated that the government has been reverse engineering current technologies from the debris found in Roswell and many other parts of the country. Chemtrails. High-speed aircraft tend to leave condensation trails, or contrails, which are line trail clouds produced by their exhaust. But conspiracy theorists believe that these contrails are actually chemtrails, which are full of chemicals sprayed by the government nationwide. The theory is that these chemicals were made for nefarious purposes that the government refuses to reveal to the public. Such purposes include solar radiation management, population control, psychological manipulation, and chemical warfare. A lot of theorists even believe that many different illnesses and health problems have arisen due to these chemtrails. However, science has long dismissed this theory because no evidence makes these chemtrails differ from the usual contrails left behind by high-speed aircraft. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. The biggest mystery in modern aviation is the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Back in March 2014, the flight mysteriously vanished off the face of the planet shortly after it left Malaysia. The sudden and weird circumstances behind its disappearance gave birth to many conspiracies. One of the theories suggests that this plane was the very same MH17 plane that got shot down by Ukraine months after the disappearance of Flight 370, and that there were political motives for the destruction of this aircraft. Another theory says that hackers could remotely take over the airplane's autopilot to pilot the aircraft to Antarctica remotely. For a while, the widely believed theory was that the pilot was suicidal and that he had planned to commit suicide while taking the passengers of the aircraft with him. Some theories suggest that the Malaysian government had something to do with the disappearance of the flight due to its unexplainable failure to communicate with the aircraft. But the craziest theory proposed was that a small black hole somehow sprouted in the Earth's atmosphere and sucked the aircraft into it, forever leaving it lost in space and time. Whatever the case may be, the fact of the matter is that the disappearance of MH370 is still the most expensive search in aviation history and led to the presumed deaths of 227 passengers and 12 crew members. 10 years later, no one still knows where this airplane is. Princess Diana's death. The British royal family has its fair share of secrets, but the most popular theory related to this family involves Princess Diana. Undoubtedly, Diana was an icon during her time. She had everything a country needed from a princess, because she was beautiful, young, charismatic, and close to the people. Diana had become so popular that she started to overshadow the entire British royal family, including her ex-husband and current king of the United Kingdom, Charles III. But in 1997, Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris, France, opening the floodgates to numerous theories and speculations regarding her death. The specifics of the theories vary, but the point is that the car accident was not an accident. but was a staged event that can be traced to the royal family. The first theory is that the royal family ordered Diana's death because of her relationship with an Egyptian film producer named Dodi Fayed. It had already been 1 year since her divorce from Charles, but because the royal family didn't want Diana and Charles's sons, the heirs to the British throne, to be related to an Egyptian and Muslim, they ordered the deaths of both Diana and Dodi, who was also involved in that accident. Another theory is that the limo driver, who was drunk at the time of the accident, was actually on the payroll of the government's intelligence group, who wanted Diana dead. Due to Diana's previous marriage to Charles, the intelligence group feared that she might leak vital information that only the members of the royal family should know. As such, the theory was that they sought to silence Diana for good by staging a car accident. JFK assassination conspiracy theories. The assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 remains one of the most mysterious events in the history of the United States. JFK, who was the U.S. president back then, was assassinated while riding a presidential motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald was the man accused of murdering JFK. But there is no clear story behind the assassination. It is estimated that there are over 1,000 books written regarding the topic of JFK's assassination, and every book tells a different story. But at least 90% of these books suggest that JFK's death was a conspiracy instead of an isolated assassination. There are plenty of different theories that try to explain that this assassination was simply a conspiracy. One of the most popular theories suggests that the CIA thought that JFK had a weak stance on communism and feared that the president might introduce it to the US. E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA agent, said in his 2007 autobiography that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson and the CIA worked together to plan JFK's assassination due to his controversial actions and decisions as president. But the most mysterious story is related to the babushka lady, an identified woman dressed similarly to a babushka or a Russian old woman. Photographs of JFK's assassination reveal the presence of this mysterious woman who wasn't even surprised or rattled by the president's death. This suggests she may have known about the planned assassination the entire time. Several people have stepped up to claim they are the mysterious babushka lady, but her real identity and link to JFK's assassination remains a mystery. Area 51. The largest alien conspiracy theory in the United States, and quite possibly the entire world, is related to Area 51, a government facility in the deserts of Nevada. This conspiracy is so popular that it has become a plot in many sci-fi movies, shows, and books. The conspiracy theory is related to the many different UFO sightings across America, and how the government seemingly tries to dismiss any claims regarding the existence of alien life forms. The popular belief is that the government has found evidence of the existence of aliens, and has been keeping it locked away in Area 51. Area 51 became the prime target of such conspiracies because it's a secretive Air Force facility that requires the highest possible government clearance. Any activity done in Area 51 is beyond the knowledge of civilians, making it the subject of conspiracy theories involving the existence of aliens and other secretive government tests and activities. Most conspiracy theorists believe that the activities done in Area 51 include meeting with aliens, the testing of time travel and teleportation technology, the development of weather control devices, and the development of new and dangerous technologies. In 2019, a Facebook event called Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us, was created to start a comedic movement involving American civilians raiding Area 51 to find out what the government has been hiding there. It became the subject of memes throughout the internet. However, nothing came out of that event. It became more of a gathering and musical festival than an actual raid. Flat Earth Theory. People believed for thousands of years that the Earth was flat and was the center of the solar system. However, the theory was disproved centuries ago, when ships and naval techniques became advanced enough for explorers to navigate the planet from end to prove that it was a sphere. But despite the overwhelming evidence that proves that our planet is spherical, some still claim that the Earth is flat. These people are called flat earthers, and this group has been trying to convince everyone to believe that the world is flat. The actual layout of the Earth varies from one theorist to another. One theory, for instance, believes in the silly notion that the world exists on a flat soundstage under a dome. Another belief is that ice walls surround the entire world. Ironically, there are thousands of flat earthers around the globe. The moon landing. During the 1960s, the US was in the middle of a space race with the Soviet Union on who would be the first to develop technology for space travel. The space wars featured many experiments, including sending a poor dog into outer space. But in July 1969, the US won when the country sent 3 brave astronauts on the Apollo 11 mission that aimed to put a man on the moon. Of course, the mission succeeded, and Neil Armstrong is forever remembered as the first man on the moon. Buzz Aldrin was the second man to step on the moon. Meanwhile, the third team member, Michael Collins, stayed in the spacecraft. While Armstrong and his crew returned to Earth as heroes, conspiracy theorists quickly came up with the notion that everything had been staged and that they never left the planet. This led to the fake moon landing conspiracy theory, suggesting that the event footage was created in a studio in Area 51. It is widely believed that the moon landing was faked so that the US could end the space race, which was an expensive rivalry that cost Americans billions of tax money. Stephen Curry, a famous NBA superstar, stated in 2018 that he believed the moon landing was a hoax. NASA responded by giving him a lunar lab tour to convince him to change his mind. In 2019, as much as 10% of Americans still believe the moon landing was fake. What is the meaning of life? Some seek answers in religion, proposing life follows a divine plan, understood through faith. Those who believe in a higher being believe that God defines a person's meaning and purpose in life. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that life lacks inherent purpose, urging people to find meaning through personal choices. For Sartre, life should be all about allowing a person's freedom to choose actions that will ultimately help them find meaning. On the other hand, existential philosophy emphasizes how our decisions shape life's meaning. Then there's science, which views life as a result of biological processes driven by survival instincts. These discussions impact how we understand personal and collective existence, encouraging us to find or create purpose in an ever-changing world. Do we have free will? Sartre believes that free will isn't bound by anything, and that we can create our destinies through our choices. For him, we are inherently free the day we are born. On the other hand, religious philosophers argue that free will is an illusion and inconsistent with the concept of religion and God, who is the sole author of human fate. But he also believes that freedom is possible, but should be limited instead of absolute. But compatibilists try to find a middle ground between the two views by believing that we can have true freedom if we act based on our motivations, instead of allowing someone to dictate how and why we should do things. Discussions about the existence of free will have helped us understand what it means to be able to choose our path, and what we can do to make the most of our lives, whether or not it was predetermined by God or another higher being. Is there a God? Humans have long wondered about the existence of a higher being, and even our advanced society has yet to prove the existence of a God. Philosophers have shed light on this topic based on their perspectives. Theists, or those who believe in God, propose that the existence of a divine being is the foundation of morality and purpose in life. On the other hand, atheists, or agnostics, disprove the existence of a God. In Karl Marx's perspective, religion simply distracts people from the sufferings of society. Meanwhile, the existential thinkers explain human existence in a way that doesn't include God because they believe a divine being does not control their lives and destinies. For them, the existence of a God limits their freedom. The debate on the existence of a God may never end, but it has helped spark the curiosities of many modern scientists and thinkers who try to make sense of the universe and how a higher being possibly plays a role in it. What is consciousness? At its core, consciousness is about having awareness and how our senses work from our point of view. However, philosophers and scientists have all talked about the true nature of consciousness. Neuroscientists believe that consciousness is simply a biological product of the brain's neural processes. just like how the brain is in a suit and experiences life through our senses. Meanwhile, plenty of modern philosophers believe that there's a separation between mind and body, and that our consciousness can extend beyond physical form. In addition, there are discussions about the hard problem of consciousness and how there could be a missing link that allows consciousness to form in brain activity. Whatever the case, the philosophical and scientific discussions about consciousness have allowed us to understand how the human mind works and how uniquely gifted humans are as self-conscious animals. Where does the soul come from? Religions believe that the soul is God's creation through the child's parents, and that He creates unique souls for every person. Ancient Greek philosophers, however, couldn't agree on one theory. Some believed that the soul had already existed before and after death, because of its divine origin. Others accepted that the soul was immortal, but only a portion was divine. However, some Greek philosophers believed that the soul doesn't have a divine nature and dies together with the body. The soul's origin is still a complicated topic that modern philosophers and scientists cannot explain, making it one of the more intriguing thoughts for those who love to explore human existence. Can machines think? The most common argument is that machines are simply products of algorithms humans design. The fact that they were created using codes makes it impossible for them to have independence. So even if artificial intelligence, or AI, can mimic human responses, it is still an inanimate object that cannot simulate pain and happiness like humans. On the other hand, another belief is that human neural activities and machine algorithms aren't so different because they are both just complex systems. Algorithms may be artificially created neural systems that function similarly to human neural networks. So if human neural activities are responsible for consciousness, what's stopping machines from developing consciousness through algorithms? What is truth? The concept of truth is one of the most subjective philosophical subjects, because philosophers throughout history have struggled to understand its nature. In most cases, thinkers wonder if a universal definition exists, or the truth is subjective. Some philosophers believe that truth is subjective, and a function of practicality. According to their beliefs, only things that have practical use can be defined as the truth, no matter their purpose. However, other philosophers who deflate the value of truth believe that it has no depth and is just a product of language. Meanwhile, postmodern thinkers also examine the role of language in shaping the concept and meaning of truth. In other words, philosophers have debated whether truth is objective or subjective. The possibility that truth has a universal meaning is still a mystery. This is why philosophers often examine cultural and societal practices and traditions to understand truth and its relevance to society. What is good and evil? Some thinkers believe that good and evil can be defined by the consequences of a person's actions. This belief gave rise to consequential philosophy, which explores the consequences of actions and how their effects. For consequentialists, actions that maximize happiness and minimize suffering are good, while their opposites are evil. They have no universal meanings for good and evil. On the other hand, moral philosophy believes that moral principles should define good or evil actions. Regardless of the consequences of a certain act, if it is inherently good or evil based on moral principles, it should always be good or evil. A good example of an inherently evil act is killing, which is always evil in the eyes of moral philosophy, even if killing someone saves thousands of lives. The evolution of good and evil concepts has helped shape modern society and the laws and norms that determine what we can or cannot do. However, traditions, cultures, and religions can also affect how we view good and evil acts, making these concepts subjective. Is there life after death? The most common belief in religion is that there is life after death. However, different religions have different versions of the afterlife. Some religions believe in reincarnation, whereas others believe in a spiritual realm for the soul, such as heaven. In most religions, our decisions in life determine our afterlife. Being good allows one to live in peace eternally after death, or be reincarnated to a better life, whereas being wicked can lead to an afterlife of suffering. Philosophy, however, looks at it differently. Democritus believed that the concept of an afterlife was ridiculous. But in other instances, those who deny the existence of an afterlife only do so because they know that it cannot be proven. Whether or not the afterlife exists, this concept has helped us make the best of our current lives, because we can't be sure if this is the only life we'll ever get to live. Why strive for perfection if it is unattainable? Ancient Greeks believed that perfection is excellence in every aspect of life, and that everyone should strive to be perfect. However, the most popular belief is that perfection can never exist, because humans are naturally flawed and will never be perfect. So what then is the purpose of striving for perfection if it is unattainable? According to Aristotle, an object is perfect if it completely fulfills its intended purpose. In simple terms, someone doesn't have to be perfect in everything for them to be perfect. As long as people fulfill their purpose in life, they can attain perfection. But another reason why people should strive to attain perfection is that it drives us to progress. It may be true that perfection cannot be achieved, but working toward perfection is the only possible way for us to progress as a society. The more we progress as a society, the better off everyone will be, even if it may be true that we can't attain perfection. Can moral dilemmas be resolved objectively? For example, if a father has to choose between saving his wife or daughter from a sinking ship, a moral dilemma arises because there is no morally right answer. Consequentialists propose that dilemmas can be resolved based on the consequences of a choice. If one choice leads to better consequences, that is the correct choice. Moralists don't believe in that concept because they believe that moral principles should guide our decisions in dilemmas. Since there's no morally right answer in most moral dilemmas, it now becomes a question of which choice is more moral than the other. Our evolving understanding of resolving moral dilemmas has helped us make the best decisions when faced with real-world problems. In most cases, people take the consequentialist route to resolve moral dilemmas. Is immortality possible? Biologically, immortality should be impossible because living bodies are limited and meant to deteriorate over time. However, the rise of technology, which has helped increase the human lifespan and possibly replace organic body parts with artificial ones, could eventually lead to immortality. Philosophy, however, has a different perspective on immortality. The ancient Greeks believed that the soul is the only part of the human that should be immortal. Meanwhile, philosophers during the Enlightenment believed immortality is impossible because humans only behave morally when they know they cannot be immortal. Religions, meanwhile, believe that it is only in the afterlife that humans can be immortal, both body and soul. Regardless of how far science and technology can take us, the realization that we cannot live forever is one of the reasons why we often have to make the most of our lives. Is our universe real? Some philosophers during the 17th century once considered life a grand illusion, created by a force he called the evil demon. However, few philosophers at his time wondered about this question. Recently, the simulation argument, proposed by some theorists such as David Chalmers, believes that we could be the product of a simulation, and that the civilization around us is also a product of a simulation. Moreover, we may not even be who we think we are, opening the possibility that our identities in the real world are different. While there is no real way to determine whether or not this is true, this philosophical question allows us to reevaluate the world around us and what we mean by real. The same philosophical question has also been featured in fictional works, particularly The Matrix.